Millionaire goes to his restaurant and sees the waitress accused of theft being fired by the manager. Upon discovering the truth, the millionaire broke down in tears. The neon lights of Chicago flickered in the puddles on the sidewalk as Michael Carter stepped out of his black luxury car. A cold wind blew through the streets, cutting through his expensive tailored coat, but he barely noticed. He had spent the entire evening at a high-profile gala, shaking hands with men who spoke in numbers and empty promises. It was the kind of life he had built: power, success, respect. Yet, as always, the moment he was alone, the void crept in. His driver had assumed they were heading home, but Michael had ordered otherwise. He wasn't in the mood for another glass of whiskey in his penthouse, or another night spent lost in paperwork. Instead, he found himself standing outside one of his lesser-known restaurants, a small, cozy spot tucked away in a quiet part of the city. It wasn't part of his usual routine to visit his businesses unannounced, but tonight, something had led him here. Maybe he wanted to see what his empire looked like from the ground. Maybe he just needed to be somewhere where no one recognized him. As he stepped inside, warmth enveloped him, a contrast to the biting cold outside. The restaurant had a charming, old-fashioned atmosphere: dim lighting, wooden tables, and the soft hum of conversation. Couples chatted over dinner, a group of friends laughed in the corner, and a few solitary figures sipped their coffee. Lost in thought, Michael chose a quiet table near the window, watching as a waitress, young, perhaps in her early 20s, moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease. Then it happened. A sharp voice sliced through the calm atmosphere. "Emily, enough. You've embarrassed this restaurant for the last time." Michael turned his head toward the scene unfolding near the counter. The waitress, Emily apparently, stood frozen, her face pale as the manager glared at her. The entire restaurant fell silent, all eyes locking onto the confrontation. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her notepad. "I don't understand. Don't play innocent with me," the manager sneered. "We caught you stealing from the register." Murmurs spread through the room. Michael narrowed his eyes, something twisting in his chest. I never stole anything," Emily stammered. Her voice shaking, the manager scoffed. "The evidence says otherwise. You're fired, and trust me, no restaurant in this city will ever hire you again." A cold dread filled Emily's eyes, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. The humiliation, the sheer desperation on her face. It struck something deep within Michael, something he couldn't explain. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound made the manager pause, turning toward him with an annoyed frown. "And who the hell are you?" the manager snapped. Michael took a step forward, his presence suddenly suffocating. "The owner of this place." A hush fell over the restaurant. The manager's face drained of color. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize you were—" "I don't think you did," Michael said coldly. He turned his sharp gaze to Emily, who stood frozen, confusion flickering in her eyes. Then, back to the manager. "Explain, now." The man hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. She's been caught taking money from the register. I had no choice but to let her go." Michael folded his arms. "Do you have proof?" The manager hesitated a second too long. Michael's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's what I thought." Emily's chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to steady her breathing. The weight of the moment crushed her, and she wasn't sure what stunned her more: the sudden turn of events or the intense way Michael Carter was staring at her, as if he recognized something in her that she herself couldn't see. Michael didn't know why he cared. He could have walked away. He could have let this play out like any other dispute in one of his restaurants. But he didn't, because something about this girl, this young woman with tired eyes and a quiet strength, unsettled him. And it wasn't just the injustice of the situation. It was something else, something deeper, something in the way her eyes reminded him of someone he once knew. The thought left an uneasy feeling in his chest. Turning back to the manager, Michael's voice hardened. "You're suspended, effective immediately. I'll conduct my own investigation, and if I find out you fabricated this accusation..." He let the threat hang in the air, watching the man swallow nervously. He then turned to Emily. "You're not fired." Emily blinked, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. What? You heard me?" For a second, she just stared at him, emotions flashing too quickly across her face. Shock, disbelief, and something else, suspicion. Michael didn't blame her. He didn't know why he was doing this. But as he walked out of the restaurant, the image of Emily's face wouldn't leave his mind. And for the first time in years, Michael Carter, cold, calculating businessman, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A need to know more, a need to understand. Because something told him this wasn't just about an employee and a corrupt manager. This was about something much, much bigger. Michael Carter couldn't shake the feeling that had settled deep in his gut. He sat in the back of his car, staring out at the city lights. But his mind was stuck in that small restaurant, replaying the scene over and over. The humiliation in Emily's eyes. The fear, the way she had stood there, powerless against a man who wielded authority like a weapon. And then there was that feeling, something beyond the obvious injustice of it all. He didn't believe in coincidences, but something about Emily unsettled him in a way he couldn't define. He needed answers. "Find everything you can on Emily Thompson," he ordered his assistant Ryan over the phone. Ryan, always efficient and never one to question orders, simply responded, "On it." Michael ended the call and leaned back against the leather seat, rubbing his temple. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe it was just a hunch, an impulse. But in his experience, gut feelings were rarely wrong. By the time he arrived home, his penthouse felt emptier than usual. The city stretched out beneath him through floor-to-ceiling windows. But the view did little to distract him. Pouring himself a drink, he stared at the glass. Lost in thought, Claire. It had been years since he let himself think about her. The only woman who had ever made him consider a life outside of boardrooms and balance sheets. The only person who had made him feel something real. But that life had been ripped away from him before it even had a chance to begin. His family had made sure of that. He took a slow sip of whiskey, the burn doing nothing to quiet his mind. The past was the past. He had moved on, hadn't he? The ringing of his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. "Ryan," he answered. "I found something," Ryan said. Emily Thompson, 24 years old. Grew up in foster care. Bounced between homes until she aged out of the system at 18. No criminal record. No history of trouble. She's been working at the restaurant for the last 3 years. Lives alone in a small apartment in West Loop. Works hard. Keeps to herself. Michael exhaled slowly. Foster care. Something inside him twisted. Ryan hesitated before continuing. There's more. Her mother's name was Claire Thompson. The glass in Michael's hand nearly slipped. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Ryan was still talking, but the words blurred together. Claire. His Claire. He gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady himself. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But the dates lined up. The timelines made sense. His mind raced back to the past, to the last time he had seen Claire, the way she had begged him to fight for them. But he had been young, too weak to stand against his family's demands. And when he had finally built the power to make his own choices, she was gone. Gone. But not alone. A daughter he never knew existed. His chest tightened. He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. His entire world tilted off its axis. "I need confirmation," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I can look into DNA testing." No, not yet. He wasn't ready for that. Not until he could face the truth himself. Ryan was silent for a beat. "Michael, if this is real, I know." He ended the call and gripped the counter, his knuckles white. For so long he had built a life of certainty, of control. And now, in a single night, everything had changed. He needed to see her again. The next morning, Michael arrived at the restaurant just as the doors opened. Emily was already there, her sleeves rolled up as she wiped down tables. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her expression unreadable. She noticed him the second he walked in, her body tensing ever so slightly. "You again," she muttered, tossing the rag onto the table. Michael ignored the hostility in her voice. "I need to talk to you." She crossed her arms. "If this is about yesterday, I appreciate you stepping in, but I don't need a hero. That's not what this is about." She narrowed her eyes. "Then what do you want?" He hesitated. How was he supposed to explain? "I looked into your case," he said instead. "You were set up. The manager was the one stealing." Emily's jaw tightened. "Figures. You don't seem surprised." She let out a humorless laugh. "When you grow up the way I did, you stop expecting fairness." Michael studied her. his heart twisting. She had no idea who she was talking to. "What do you know about your parents?" he asked carefully. Her expression darkened. "Why do you care?" He exhaled. "I knew someone with your last name once, a long time ago." Something flickered in her gaze, but she masked it quickly. "My mother died when I was a baby," she said, her voice flat. "I don't remember her. I don't know anything about my father." Michael swallowed against the lump in his throat. "I'm sorry." Emily shrugged, but there was something forced about it. "Doesn't matter. You can't miss what you never had." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he had spent years unknowingly missing something, someone, but he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he figured out how to fix the damage that had already been done. Michael sat in his office, staring at the city skyline, but his mind was nowhere near the towering buildings or the empire he had built. Instead, it was stuck in the past, in a time when he had been young, foolish, and too weak to fight for what truly mattered. Claire, the memory of her face, her laughter, the way she used to tilt her head when she was trying to read him, it all came rushing back like a tidal wave, drowning him in regret. And now, Emily, his daughter, he had spent his life making decisions based on logic, analyzing numbers, risks, and rewards. But there was no formula for this, no strategy to undo 2 decades of absence. He had thought he knew everything about his life, about his past. Yet, here he was, unraveling a secret he never even knew existed. The bracelet, that tiny silver bracelet on Emily's wrist, had triggered something deep inside him. It was impossible to mistake it for anything else. He remembered the exact moment he had given it to Claire. She had been 19, and they had spent an entire afternoon in a tiny antique shop in Boston, laughing as they picked through dusty shelves of forgotten treasures. When she had found that bracelet, delicate, simple, with a small charm shaped like a crescent moon, her eyes had lit up. She had never taken it off, and now, Emily wore it. Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He needed to know more. That night, he returned to the restaurant. He knew Emily would be there. She never missed a shift, according to the reports Ryan had pulled. He wasn't sure if she would even talk to him after their last conversation, but he had to try. When he stepped inside, he immediately spotted her, clearing a table near the back. Her movements were quick and precise, her expression distant. She noticed him almost instantly, and let out a quiet sigh before walking over. "You really don't give up, do you?" she said, crossing her arms. Michael met her gaze. "Not when something's important." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to figure him out. "What do you want?" He nodded toward her wrist. "Your bracelet. Where did you get it?" Emily blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. Instinctively, she touched the silver band, her fingers brushing against the crescent charm. "My mom gave it to me," she said after a pause. "It's the only thing I have of hers." His chest tightened. She frowned, watching him closely. "Why do you care?" Michael hesitated. He had never been an emotional man, had never been one to wear his heart on his sleeve. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely. "That bracelet," he said carefully, "belonged to someone I knew a long time ago." Emily's brow furrowed. "So what?" Michael's grip on the back of the chair tightened. He could see the walls around her, the instinctive defense mechanism she had built over years of surviving alone. "What was your mother's name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated. "Claire," she finally said. The name hung between them. Heavy and unspoken for far too long, Michael forced himself to breathe. He had known the truth before she even said it, but hearing it from her lips still sent a shock through his entire body. He had a daughter who had grown up thinking she was alone, a daughter who had no idea that the man standing in front of her was the father she had never known. Emily shifted uncomfortably. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Michael hesitated for a second too long. "Did you know her?" she pressed. "Yes." Emily's expression hardened. "Were you close?" Michael swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "We were together, a long time ago." A flash of something crossed her face. Shock, anger, confusion. "Then where the hell were you?" The words hit like a punch. He had no answer that would make this right. No justification that could erase the years she had spent alone. "I didn't know," he admitted. "No one told me." Emily let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Of course. Because that makes it all better, right?" Michael clenched his fists. "If I had known..." "But you didn't," she interrupted. "And now? What? You expect me to believe that you suddenly care? That you're some great long-lost father who's here to make up for 24 years of nothing?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, he saw it. The pain beneath the anger. Michael's chest ached. "I don't expect anything from you." Emily exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over her face. "I don't even know why I'm standing here, having this conversation. You don't get to walk in and act like you give a damn." Michael felt the weight of her words. He had spent his whole life negotiating deals, but there was no deal to be made here. No business strategy to fix what had been broken. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he said, "but I need you to know the truth." Emily shook her head. "I don't owe you anything." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing there, the weight of 2 decades of regret settling over him. She was right. She didn't owe him anything, but he owed her everything, and he wasn't going to walk away. Michael sat in his car outside the restaurant long after Emily had walked away. The words she had thrown at him echoed in his mind. Sharp and unforgiving. Where the hell were you? He had no answer that would make any of this right. No justification for 24 years of absence. He had spent his entire life making decisions with precision and control. Yet in the moment that mattered most, he felt powerless. Emily had every right to hate him. But he wasn't going to give up. He had lost her mother once. He wasn't about to lose his daughter. The drive back to his penthouse felt longer than usual. The city lights blurred past him, but his thoughts remained fixated on Claire, on the last time he had seen her, on the way she had looked at him, waiting for him to fight for her, to choose her. And he hadn't. He had let his family make the decision for him. His father, William Carter, had made it clear. There was no room in their world for a woman like Claire. She had come from nothing, and in his father's eyes, she would only be a stain on the family's legacy. Michael had been young, too eager to prove himself, too weak to stand against the expectations that had been drilled into him since birth. And when he had finally gathered the courage to go after her, she was gone, disappeared. No trace, no way to find her. Now he knew why. She had been pregnant. She had been alone, and no one had told him. A deep anger settled in his chest. Not at Emily, not at Claire, but at the people who had kept this from him. His family, his father. Michael grabbed his phone and dialed the one number he never thought he would call again. "Michael." His father's voice came through after a few rings. Smooth and controlled as always. "This is unexpected." Michael leaned back in his seat, staring at the skyline. "Did you know?" There was a pause. Then, in that cold, practiced tone, "You're going to have to be more specific. Did you know Claire was pregnant?" His voice came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. Silence. A long, deliberate silence. Then his father sighed. "Michael, it was a long time ago." His stomach tightened. "That's not an answer." Another pause. Then finally, "Yes, I knew." Michael's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles white. "You knew." His voice was deadly quiet. "It was for the best," his father continued, as if he were discussing a business merger. "You had a future ahead of you. A child with that woman would have ruined everything. I did what needed to be done." Michael felt something in him snap. "You did what needed to be done," he repeated, his voice now laced with disbelief. "You took my daughter from me. You let Claire go through that alone, and you thought that was for the best. She would have held you back." Michael let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair. "She died, Dad, alone, and my daughter grew up in foster care." For the first time, his father hesitated. You didn't what?" Michael cut him off. "Didn't think I'd ever find out. Didn't care what happened to them." "This conversation is pointless," his father said stiffly. "You have a successful life, a legacy, you're a Carter, and you need to start acting like one instead of dwelling on the past." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "That's where you're wrong. Being a Carter means nothing to me anymore." Without waiting for a response, he hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. For years, he had worked to prove himself to a man who had never truly cared. And now, In one conversation, everything was clear. His father had taken away the only family that had ever really mattered, but this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about Emily. He needed to find a way to reach her, to show her that she wasn't alone anymore. But how could he do that when she had every reason to push him away? The next day, he returned to the restaurant. Emily was there, just as he expected, her expression unreadable when she saw him walk in. She didn't say anything as he approached, just waited, arms crossed, like she was bracing for whatever he had to say next. "I want to talk," he said. She let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I got that impression." Michael ignored her sarcasm. "I spoke to my father." Emily's expression flickered, just for a second before she masked it again. "And he knew. He knew about you. He made sure I never found out." She stiffened. Michael took a slow breath. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't expect you to believe me, but I need you to know. I would have been there, if I had known. I would have never let you grow up alone." Emily's jaw tightened. "And what am I supposed to do with that information?" Michael hesitated, then said simply, "Whatever you want." She stared at him, as if trying to find the lie in his words. "I don't know you," she finally said. "I don't know what kind of person you are. And honestly, I don't know if I want to." It hurt more than he expected, but he nodded. "I understand." Emily's fingers twitched, like she wanted to say something else, but she held back. Instead, she shook her head. "I have to get back to work." Michael stepped aside, watching as she walked away. This wasn't going to be easy, but he had spent his life building an empire from nothing. He wasn't going to give up on the one thing that actually mattered. Not this time. Michael Carter had always believed that every problem had a solution, that with enough power, enough resources, and enough determination, anything could be fixed. But now, sitting in his office with his hands clenched into fists, he was beginning to realize that some things couldn't be undone. Some wounds were too deep. Emily didn't want anything to do with him, and he didn't blame her. He had spent the past 24 hours replaying every word she had said, every guarded expression, every flicker of pain in her eyes. She wasn't just angry. She had lived her entire life believing she was alone. He was nothing more than another person trying to walk into her life as if he had the right to be there, but he wasn't going to give up. His father had stolen his chance to be there for her, but that didn't mean he had to accept defeat. If there was any part of Emily that could learn to trust him, he would find it. A knock at his office door pulled him from his thoughts. Ryan stepped inside, a folder in his hands, his expression hesitant. "You asked me to dig deeper into Emily's past," Ryan said. "I found something you should see." Michael gestured for him to sit, already bracing himself. Ryan placed the folder on the desk and slid it toward him. "I was able to track down some records from the foster care system. Emily was moved between 6 different homes before she turned 18. None of them lasted more than a year. Some were neglectful, some worse than that." Michael's stomach tightened as he flipped through the documents. Case notes, school reports, medical records, each one a reminder of how much she had suffered. "She aged out of the system and went straight into survival mode," Ryan continued. "Took whatever job she could find. Worked her way through school part-time. Never stayed in one place too long. There's a pattern to it. She doesn't let people get too close. It's like she's always waiting for them to leave." Michael swallowed hard, staring at a photo of a young Emily, maybe 10 or 11, her eyes already filled with a guarded wariness. "She never had a chance," he muttered. Ryan exhaled. "And now you understand why she doesn't trust you." Michael closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He had spent decades building restaurants, expanding his empire, making sure every deal was airtight. And yet, the one thing that truly mattered, the one person who should have been his priority, had been left to fend for herself. "How do I fix this?" he asked quietly. Ryan hesitated. "You don't." Michael looked up, his jaw tightening. Ryan sighed. "I mean, you can't force this, Michael. She's been let down by everyone in her life. If you push too hard, she'll shut you out completely." Michael knew he was right. Emily wasn't a business deal to be negotiated. She was a person who had spent years learning to protect herself. If he wanted any chance at a relationship with her, he had to earn it, but how? An idea formed in his mind. Risky, but necessary. He stood, already reaching for his coat. I need to see her, he said. Ryan frowned. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, Michael admitted, but I have to try. It didn't take long to find her. She had just finished her shift at the restaurant and was walking home, bundled up against the crisp Chicago air. Michael pulled over and got out of the car. Emily. She stopped, clearly annoyed but not surprised. You again? He walked toward her, hands in his coat pockets. I need to talk to you. She let out a sigh. Of course you do. I found your foster records. Her entire body tensed. She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. And? Michael hesitated. I didn't realize how hard things were for you. Emily let out a short, humorless laugh. Why would you? You weren't there. I know, he admitted, and I can't change that, but I can try to be here now. She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. You don't get it, do you? Then help me understand, he said softly. Her eyes darkened. You think reading a bunch of old reports gives you some kind of insight into my life? You think knowing how many times I was shuffled between homes makes you feel something? Well, congratulations. You feel guilty. Now what? Michael exhaled. I don't expect you to forgive me, Emily. I don't even expect you to let me in. But I need you to know, I'm not walking away. She stared at him, arms still crossed tightly around herself. He could see the walls she had built, the instinct to push people away before they could hurt her. I don't need you to fix me, she said finally. Michael nodded. I know. Her grip on her arms tightened. I don't know what you want from me. He took a step closer. Nothing. Just the chance to know you. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Finally, Emily sighed, looking away. I don't know if I can do that. Michael swallowed the lump in his throat. I'll wait. She let out a breath, shaking her head. You're exhausting. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile, just a little. Emily glanced at him, almost curious. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Michael didn't follow. He didn't push. But for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't keep running forever. Emily walked faster than usual, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold wind biting at her face or the conversation she had just had with Michael Carter. She had expected him to disappear. Most people did. They got tired of her walls, of the way she kept everyone at arm's length. But he was still here, still trying, and that scared her more than anything. She didn't know how to process the things he had told her, the way he had looked at her, the weight behind his words. I'll wait. No one had ever waited for her before. By the time she reached her apartment, her hands were shaking. She tried to tell herself it was from the cold. Inside, the space was quiet, small but tidy. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was safe. She dropped her bag on the counter, her eyes falling on the single framed photograph she had. It was the only picture she had of her mother, Claire, smiling softly at the camera, her eyes kind but sad. Emily sat down, staring at the picture. What am I supposed to do, Mom? She whispered. She had spent her whole life believing she had no one, that she had come from nothing, that she was meant to figure things out alone. But now, this man, the man who was supposed to be her father, was trying to change everything, and she didn't know if she could handle that. The next morning, Emily walked into the restaurant for her shift, feeling the exhaustion settle deep in her bones. She had barely slept, her mind replaying everything over and over again. She wasn't expecting to see Michael Carter sitting at a table in the far corner, sipping coffee like he belonged there. She stopped mid-step, irritation flaring up inside her. Seriously? Michael looked up, calm as ever. Good morning to you too. Emily exhaled sharply, walking over. You can't just keep showing up? Why not? He asked, setting his cup down. It's a public restaurant, and if you've forgotten, I own it. Emily glared at him. That's not the point. Michael studied her, his gaze steady. You didn't tell me to leave last night. She faltered, her fingers tightening around her notepad. He was right. She could have told him to go, could have told him to stop trying, but she hadn't. She didn't have an answer for him. Michael sighed, leaning back. Emily, I know I can't fix the past, and I know you don't trust me, but I meant what I said. I'm not walking away. Emily swallowed hard. Why? Michael's jaw tightened. Because I lost your mother. I didn't even know I had a daughter, and now that I do, I can't just pretend I don't." The words hit deeper than she wanted to admit. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "What do you expect from me?" "Nothing," he said simply. "Just a chance." Emily stared at him, her mind spinning. A part of her wanted to tell him to leave, to make things simple again. But another part, one she barely acknowledged, was afraid of what it would mean if she let him stay. Instead of answering, she turned and walked away. Michael didn't stop her. For the rest of the day, she felt his presence there, quiet and steady. He didn't push, didn't demand anything. He just existed in the space, waiting. It was infuriating, but it was also the first time someone had ever stayed. That night, as she was closing up, she caught sight of him still sitting there, his hands clasped together on the table. He looked lost in thought. His usual sharp exterior softened. She hesitated before speaking. "Why do you care so much?" Michael looked up, his expression unreadable. "Because I should have been there, and I wasn't," Emily exhaled. "You can't change that." "I know," he said, "but I can be here now." She studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "I don't know how to do this." Michael gave a small, almost sad smile. "Me neither." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected him to be like everyone else, full of easy answers and empty promises, but he wasn't pretending to have it figured out. And somehow, that made it worse. She sighed, crossing her arms. "I don't know if I can forgive you." Michael nodded slowly. "I'll wait." Emily looked at him, trying to understand why he was doing this, but she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Without another word, she turned and walked away. But for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to run. Michael wasn't a man used to waiting. In his world, things happened on his terms. At his pace, deals were closed swiftly. Negotiations were handled with precision, and problems were solved before they even had the chance to escalate. But this wasn't business. This was Emily, and no amount of power, wealth, or strategy could change the fact that she wanted nothing to do with him. Still, he kept showing up, not just at the restaurant, but in her world, subtly, carefully, but consistently. He didn't push, he didn't demand, he simply stayed. Emily, however, wasn't making it easy. She didn't tell him to leave, but she also didn't acknowledge his presence when he greeted her. She gave him curt nods. When he asked questions, she answered in the shortest possible way, and when he lingered at the restaurant, sipping his coffee, she pretended he wasn't there at all. But Michael wasn't going anywhere. One evening, after another long day of trying and failing to get through to her, Michael found himself sitting across from Ryan in his office, frustration evident in the tightness of his shoulders. "She won't talk to me," he admitted, rubbing his temple. "I don't know how to reach her," Ryan exhaled. "She's spent her whole life being let down. You showing up out of nowhere isn't going to change that overnight." Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I know, I don't want to waste any more time." Ryan hesitated before speaking. "Maybe you should stop waiting for her to come to you. Maybe you need to step into her world." Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" "You've been meeting her on your terms, the restaurant. Your way of doing things. But have you actually tried to understand her life? Where she comes from?" Michael was silent, because the truth was, he hadn't. The next morning, instead of going straight to the restaurant, he drove to the part of town where Emily lived. It wasn't a dangerous area, but it was a far cry from the luxury he was used to. The buildings were older, the streets worn with time. It was a place where people worked hard to survive, where nothing was handed to them. He parked and walked toward a small bookstore on the corner, one he had seen Emily pass by a few times. He stepped inside, scanning the aisles until he spotted her near the back, flipping through a worn copy of an old novel. She hadn't noticed him yet. For a moment, he just watched her, taking in the way she ran her fingers along the pages as if searching for something familiar. Then, as if sensing his presence, she glanced up and froze. Her expression shifted instantly from calm to guarded. "Are you following me now?" Michael raised his hand slightly. "It's a bookstore, Emily. Not exactly a crime for me to be here." She narrowed her eyes. "You've never set foot in a place like this in your life." Michael smirked. "You'd be surprised." She let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. Seriously, what are you doing here? Michael hesitated before answering. Trying to understand you. Emily blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. He stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. I know I can't fix the past. I know I can't just walk in and expect you to trust me, but I want to know who you are, what you care about, even if that means showing up in places I've never been before. She stared at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she looked down at the book in her hands, running her fingers over the spine. This was my mom's favorite, she murmured. Michael's chest tightened. Claire? Emily nodded slowly. She used to read it to me when I was little. I barely remember, but I always come back to it. Michael reached out carefully, brushing a finger against the book's cover. She used to read to me too, he admitted. Late at night, when I was too stressed from work, she always said stories made the world feel bigger. Emily was still holding the book, her grip tightening slightly. I don't remember much about her, she said after a long silence. Just little things, the way she smelled, the way her voice sounded when she hummed. Michael swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He had spent so many years missing Claire, but he had never thought about what it had been like for Emily. She had lost her mother before she had the chance to truly know her, and then she had spent her life never knowing she had a father. I wish I could have known her longer, Emily admitted. Michael's voice was quiet. Me too, for a moment. They stood there, surrounded by books and memories that neither of them could fully grasp. Then Emily exhaled sharply, shaking her head. This doesn't change anything. Michael nodded. I know. She glanced at him, hesitating. Then, to his surprise, she handed him the book. If you really want to understand me, she said, start with this. Michael took it carefully, as if holding something fragile. He looked at the title, Wuthering Heights. Claire had once told him it was a story about love, loss, and redemption. Somehow it felt fitting. Emily turned to leave, but before she did, she paused. I work the morning shift tomorrow. You might as well stop drinking coffee in the evenings if you're planning to keep showing up. Michael stared after her, stunned. She was letting him in, just a little. And for now, that was enough. Michael spent the entire night reading Wuthering Heights. He wasn't sure if it was to understand Emily or to feel closer to Claire. But either way, he found himself absorbed in the pages, the weight of the story sinking deep into his chest. It wasn't an easy read, not just because of the language, but because of what it represented. Claire had loved this book. Emily did too. And somehow, between all the years lost, it had remained a bridge between them. By the time the first hints of morning light crept through his windows, he had finished it. He didn't sleep. Instead, he found himself at the restaurant before it even opened, waiting. The air was crisp, the city still waking up around him, but his mind was too restless to focus on anything except the conversation ahead. When Emily arrived, she stopped mid-step at the sight of him leaning against the entrance, coffee in hand. She sighed, already exasperated. You're really committed to this, huh? Michael smirked. You told me to lay off the evening coffee. I'm taking your advice. Emily rolled her eyes but didn't argue as she unlocked the door. He followed her inside, watching as she moved through the space with familiarity. She grabbed an apron, tying it around her waist, before finally looking at him. So what? She gestured toward the book peeking out of his coat pocket. You actually read it? Michael pulled it out, setting it on the counter. Cover to cover. She raised an eyebrow. And, he exhaled, I think Catherine and Heathcliff were both stubborn idiots who caused their own suffering. Emily stared at him for a second before laughing. It was short, unexpected, and gone too quickly, but it was the first time he had seen real amusement in her eyes. Finally, she muttered, shaking her head. Someone who gets it. Michael felt something shift between them. It wasn't much, but it was something. She started setting up for the morning rush, and for once, she didn't tell him to leave. He took a seat at the counter, sipping his coffee as she worked. It was quiet, almost peaceful then. Out of nowhere, she spoke. My first foster home was awful. Michael set his cup down slowly, his body tensing at the sudden confession. Emily didn't look at him. She wiped down a table, her voice steady but distant. I was 5, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to know I wasn't wanted. The couple took me in for the money, not because they actually cared. They barely spoke to me. I spent most of my time in my room. Michael clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists beneath the counter. They sent me back after a year, she continued, her tone emotionless. Said I was too difficult. I wasn't. I was just quiet. I guess they wanted something easier. Michael forced himself to breathe. He had read about her foster history in the files Ryan had given him, but hearing it from her was different. Emily finally looked at him. You wanted to know me. This is part of me. Michael's throat felt tight. You didn't deserve that. She shrugged. It wasn't the worst one. He felt sick. How many times had she been tossed aside? How many nights had she spent alone, feeling like she was nothing more than a burden? I should have been there, he said quietly. Emily exhaled, crossing her arms. Yeah, well, you weren't. The words weren't angry, just factual. And somehow, that hurt more. Michael didn't try to defend himself. What could he say? That he hadn't known. That his father had kept the truth from him. None of it changed the fact that she had grown up believing she had no one. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He sat with the weight of it. He let the silence stretch between them, acknowledging the pain without trying to fix it. Emily studied him for a long moment before sighing. I have to start work. Michael nodded. Okay. She hesitated. But you can stay. If you want. His heart clenched. I want, he said. Emily nodded once, then turned back to her work. Michael sat there for hours, watching as she moved through her shift, interacting with customers, keeping her distance but never once telling him to leave. Maybe this was what progress looked like. Slow, messy, uncertain. But for the first time, it felt like they weren't just two strangers trying to fix the past. They were something more. Michael had always been good at reading people. It was a skill that had served him well in business, allowing him to anticipate reactions, manipulate negotiations, and stay ahead of the competition. But with Emily, nothing was predictable. He had expected anger, resentment, maybe even indifference. What he hadn't expected was the quiet way she let him stay, the way she slowly, carefully, began to let pieces of herself slip through the cracks of her guarded exterior. And now, sitting at the counter of the restaurant, watching her move through her morning shift, he found himself desperate for every single piece of her he could get. She was efficient, precise in her movements as she poured coffee for customers, cleared tables, and took orders. She never lingered, never wasted motion. It was as if she had been doing this her entire life. Maybe she had. Michael thought about all the jobs she had worked, the years she had spent surviving instead of living. How many mornings like this had she endured, with no one watching, no one caring? He clenched his jaw, pushing back the anger threatening to surface. Emily wiped down a nearby table, not looking at him as she spoke. So, are you just going to sit there all day? Michael smirked, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Maybe. She rolled her eyes but didn't tell him to leave. That was something. A few minutes passed before she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I don't usually talk about my past. Michael straightened, setting his cup down carefully. I don't expect you to. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the rag she was holding. It's not some tragic story that people want to hear. No big dramatic moment. Just a lot of years feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Michael swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay still, to listen. My first foster home wasn't great, she continued. I was 5. Too young to really understand what was happening, but old enough to know when I wasn't wanted. Michael gripped the edge of the counter. What happened? Emily shrugged. They barely talked to me. Didn't hit me or anything, but they made it clear I was just there for the check they got every month. I spent most of my time alone in my room. Michael felt sick. They sent me back after a year, she said flatly. Said I was too quiet, too difficult. Michael exhaled slowly, trying to keep his emotions in check. You weren't difficult, Emily. You were a child. She let out a small, humorless laugh. Yeah, well, tell that to the system. He wanted to reach for her, to do something, anything to erase the years of neglect she had endured. But he couldn't. I went through 5 more homes before I turned 18, she continued. Some were better than others. Some were worse. Michael's grip on the counter tightened. Emily's voice was steady, but he could hear the exhaustion beneath it, the weight of everything she had carried alone. The last one was probably the worst, she admitted. I was 16. The foster dad was controlling. Not physically abusive, but he liked making me feel small. Made sure I knew that I was just a temporary guest in his house, that I should be grateful. Michael's blood turned to ice. Did he hurt you? Emily shook her head. No, but he made me feel like I was one wrong move away from being kicked out onto the street. And I believed him. Michael clenched his fists under the counter. Emily, she finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. You wanted to know me? Well, this is part of me. Michael exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. You didn't deserve any of that. She shrugged. It wasn't all bad. There were good moments, a few people who actually cared. Michael latched onto that. Like who? Emily hesitated before answering. There was a teacher, Miss Bennett. She knew I was struggling and let me eat lunch in her classroom when I didn't want to sit with the other kids. She gave me books to read, encouraged me to write. Michael's chest tightened. She sounds like a good person. She was, Emily admitted. She told me I was more than just a foster kid, that I could make something of myself. Michael swallowed hard. She was right. Emily huffed a quiet laugh. I don't know about that. Michael shook his head. I do. She studied him for a moment, then looked away. Why do you even care? Michael leaned forward slightly. Because I should have been there. Emily tensed. But you weren't. The words were sharp, but there was no real anger behind them. Just exhaustion. Michael forced himself to nod. I know, she sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't know what you want from me, Michael. I don't want anything, he said softly. I just want to know you. Emily's fingers twitched, like she wanted to argue, but instead, she let out a long breath. This doesn't change anything, she muttered. Michael nodded. I know. She hesitated for a second longer, then turned back to her work. Michael sat there, watching her move, feeling the weight of everything she had told him settle deep into his bones. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she was talking, and for now, that was enough. Michael sat in the restaurant long after Emily had finished her shift. He didn't know why he stayed. Maybe it was the silence, the feeling that if he left too soon, the small progress they had made would disappear like smoke. Or maybe he was just afraid that once he stepped outside, the weight of everything he had learned about her past would crush him. He had spent his whole life making calculated decisions, controlling every aspect of his business, ensuring that no surprises could throw him off balance. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of Emily's life, the foster homes, the loneliness, the way she had grown up believing she was alone. And the worst part, he had been there, living his life, building an empire, never once knowing that somewhere, his daughter was struggling just to survive. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. Regret was a bitter thing, settling in his chest like a weight that refused to lift. A familiar voice broke through his thoughts. You still here? Michael looked up to see Emily standing near the counter, arms crossed, eyebrow raised in mild irritation. She had changed out of her uniform into a worn hoodie and jeans, looking more like herself, comfortable, guarded, but somehow softer than before. You never told me to leave, Michael said, offering a small smirk. She sighed, walking toward him. I figured you'd get the hint. Michael watched as she sat across from him, resting her elbows on the table. He wasn't sure what to say, but for the first time, he didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Emily glanced at him. You look like hell. Michael huffed a quiet laugh. Thanks. She studied him for a moment, then spoke again, more hesitant this time. Did you sleep at all? Michael hesitated before answering. Not really. Emily frowned. Why? Michael ran a hand through his hair, debating whether to tell her the truth. Finally, he exhaled. I was thinking about you. Emily stiffened slightly, but she didn't immediately push him away. Michael leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. I don't know how to make this right. I don't even know if I can make it right, but I do know that I don't want to waste any more time pretending like this doesn't matter. Emily swallowed hard, looking away. I never asked for this. I know, Michael said quietly. She rubbed her hands together, like she was trying to warm them, even though the restaurant wasn't cold. I don't know how to do this, Michael. Michael studied her, his chest tightening. Neither do I. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The weight of the conversation sat between them. heavy and unspoken. Then Emily broke the silence. "You said you didn't know about me." Michael nodded. "That's true. But you knew my mom was pregnant," she said, her voice colder now. Michael hesitated. "No, He stopped himself, realizing what she was getting at. Emily's expression hardened. "You're telling me that you had no idea, not even a suspicion." Michael exhaled sharply. "I didn't," Emily scoffed. "How is that possible?" Michael clenched his jaw. "Because my father made sure I didn't." Emily's fingers tightened into fists on the table. "What do you mean?" Michael took a deep breath, bracing himself. "I found out recently that he knew. He knew about you, and he kept it from me." Emily's face went pale. "You're lying." "I'm not," Michael said. "Michael," his voice steady. "I confronted him. He admitted it." Emily shook her head, standing abruptly. "That doesn't make sense. Why would he do that?" Michael hesitated before answering. "Because he thought Claire would ruin my future, and because he thought you would ruin my legacy." Emily flinched, like the words had physically struck her. Michael stood as well, his voice softer now. "I swear to you, Emily, I didn't know. If I had..." "But you didn't." Emily cut him off, her voice sharp. Michael stepped closer, desperate to make her understand. "I would have fought for you." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Right, just like you fought for my mom." Michael stilled, the words hitting deeper than he expected. Emily's breathing was unsteady. "You left her. She was pregnant and you left her." Michael clenched his jaw. "I didn't know she was pregnant." Emily's eyes burned with anger. "But you knew she needed you and you still walked away." Michael swallowed the lump in his throat. "I was a coward." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the admission. Michael ran a hand down his face. "I was young. I let my father control me. And by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late." Emily stared at him, something unreadable in her expression. Michael took another step forward. "I can't change what happened, but I can be here now." Emily exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't know if that's enough." Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then tell me what is enough." Emily looked away, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "I don't know." Michael felt his heart sink. Emily sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. "I need time." Michael swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay." Emily hesitated before speaking again. "I'm not saying I forgive you, or that I believe you, but..." She trailed off, then exhaled sharply. "I don't hate you, not completely." Michael let out a slow breath. It wasn't much, but it was something. Michael left the restaurant that night with a storm raging inside him. Emily's words clung to him, looping over and over in his mind. You left her? She was pregnant, and you left her. He had spent his life making powerful decisions, controlling his fate, ensuring no one else dictated his path. And yet, the one thing that truly mattered had been taken from him before he even had the chance to fight for it. His father had stolen years from him, years he would never get back, but he wasn't going to let anyone steal his future with Emily. The problem was, she still wasn't sure if she wanted him in it. As he stepped into his penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him, he loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. But before he could take a sip, his phone buzzed. "Ryan?" Michael answered, his voice gruff. "Tell me you have good news." Ryan exhaled on the other end. "That depends on your definition of good. I found something on the former manager of the restaurant." Michael tensed. "Go on." "You were right to be suspicious. The guy, Paul Green, wasn't just stealing. He's been involved in multiple fraud schemes. He siphoned money from at least 3 other businesses before landing at your restaurant." Michael gritted his teeth. "And no one caught him," Ryan sighed. "They did, but every time he found a way to disappear before facing real consequences. He would move, change jobs, and start again." Michael's grip tightened around the glass. "Is he still in the city?" "Yeah, and he's not happy about getting fired. I heard from a source that he's been spreading rumors about Emily, telling people she really was stealing, that you only defended her because she..." Ryan hesitated. Michael's voice turned ice cold. "Because she what?" Ryan cleared his throat. "Because she knew how to get in your good graces." Michael's vision darkened. A deep, slow rage built inside him. He set his glass down carefully before he shattered it in his hand. "Where is he?" Ryan hesitated. "Michael? Where?" Ryan sighed. "I'll text you the address." Michael ended the call without another word. He didn't care what time it was, or how this would look. No one was going to drag Emily's name through the mud. 15 minutes later, Michael pulled up outside a dimly lit bar in a rundown part of the city. He stepped inside, immediately spotting Paul Green at a corner table, nursing a beer, his greasy hair falling into his eyes. Paul barely had time to register Michael's presence before he was yanked up by the collar and slammed against the wall. Michael's voice was dangerously low. "Say it again." Paul's eyes widened in panic. "What the hell?" Michael pressed harder, his forearm digging into Paul's throat. "Say her name again. Say one more word about Emily, and I promise you, you won't have a single place in this city that'll hire you to scrub dishes, let alone manage a restaurant." Paul wheezed, his hands clawing at Michael's arm. I was just talking, man." Michael shoved him back against the wall, letting him stumble. "You don't talk about her. You don't think about her. You disappear." His voice dropped, lethal. "Or I make sure you do." Paul swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. Okay, Jesus." Michael stepped back, straightening his cuffs as if nothing had happened. Then, just before turning away, he added, "If I hear so much as a whisper of you in my restaurants again, I'll make sure you regret it." Paul didn't argue. Michael left the bar, his blood still boiling. He wasn't a violent man. He didn't resort to threats unless absolutely necessary. But this was necessary. The next morning, Michael arrived at the restaurant early, still running on adrenaline. Emily was already there, setting up for the day. She raised an eyebrow at him. "You look like you didn't sleep." Michael smirked. "I didn't." Emily rolled her eyes but didn't push further. Michael hesitated before speaking again. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked at him warily. "What?" Michael exhaled. "That manager, Paul Green, he's been spreading lies about you, telling people you were actually stealing. And worse." Emily stiffened, her jaw clenching. "Let me guess." "That I was sleeping my way out of it." Michael's stomach twisted at how easily she said it, like she had heard this kind of accusation before. "I took care of it," he said simply. Emily frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means he won't be talking about you again." Emily crossed her arms. "What did you do?" Michael met her gaze evenly. "I made sure he understood that if he so much as mentioned your name again, he'd regret it." Emily let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Emily stared at him for a long moment before looking away. "People have always talked about me. It doesn't matter." Michael's voice was firm. "It matters to me." She glanced at him, something flickering in her expression before she quickly masked it. "I can handle myself, you know." Michael softened. "I know, but you don't have to." Emily swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. "You can't just fix things, Michael. You can't erase the past." Michael nodded. "I know that too." Emily exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face. "You make things complicated." Michael smirked. "It's a gift." Emily let out a soft, reluctant laugh, shaking her head. It was small, but it was real. And for the first time, Michael thought that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe that she didn't have to fight every battle alone. Emily didn't know why she was still letting Michael show up. Every time she saw him walk through the restaurant doors, she told herself she was going to tell him to leave, to stop whatever this was. But she never did. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the sheer stubbornness he showed, refusing to give up no matter how many walls she put between them. Or maybe, just maybe, some small part of her wanted to see how far he was willing to go. And now, sitting across from him after the lunch rush, she found herself feeling something unfamiliar. Safety. She had never had someone stand up for her before. Not like he did. People had come and gone in her life, most too busy with their own problems to care about some foster kid who had learned to fight her own battles. But Michael had chosen to defend her, and she didn't know how to deal with that. She tapped her fingers against the table, glancing at him. "So, you threatened that guy for me." Michael sipped his coffee, looking entirely unbothered. "I did." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You're not even going to pretend you didn't." Michael set his cup down, meeting her gaze. "Why would I?" Emily let out a breath, shaking her head. "You really don't do things halfway, do you?" Michael smirked. "Not when it comes to family." The word hit her like a punch to the chest. Family? She looked away, suddenly feeling too exposed. Michael leaned forward slightly. Does that bother you? Emily exhaled. I don't know. I've never had one before. Michael's face softened, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes. Something real. You do now, he said quietly. Emily swallowed against the lump in her throat. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for him, but the thought of pushing him away again didn't feel as easy as it used to. The next few days passed in a blur. Michael continued showing up, and Emily continued letting him. Their conversations grew longer, the silences between them less heavy. She still didn't know what to do with him, but she stopped questioning his presence. Then, just when she thought things were settling into something almost normal, reality reminded her that life never made things easy. It happened late one evening, just after closing. Emily was locking up when she felt someone watching her. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, a prickle of unease creeping down her spine. She turned and froze. Paul Green. He stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost, a cigarette between his fingers. His eyes were locked on her, a slow smirk pulling at his lips. Emily's pulse quickened. She had dealt with men like him before, the kind who didn't take well to being exposed, the kind who liked reminding people that they still held some power, even after they had lost. She gritted her teeth and turned away, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. But before she could start walking, his voice cut through the night air. Careful, sweetheart, he called. Not everyone's gonna protect you forever. Emily clenched her fists. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze with steel in her own. That sounds like a threat. Paul exhaled a puff of smoke, shrugging. Just a friendly warning. Emily's jaw tightened. Stay away from me, Paul smirked. Or what? You'll run to your new daddy. A wave of nausea rolled through her. That's what this was. He knew. He knew about Michael, and he was using it against her. Emily forced herself to keep her voice steady. I don't need anyone to handle people like you. Paul took a step closer. Maybe, but I wonder what he'd do if he knew you were all alone right now. A cold chill ran through her. She turned on her heel and walked away, refusing to let him see how much his words got to her. She made it 2 blocks before pulling out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She hesitated. Then, before she could change her mind, she pressed call. Michael picked up on the first ring. Emily. His voice was alert, instantly concerned. She exhaled shakily. I need you to come get me. There was a pause, then. Where are you? She told him. 15 minutes later. His car pulled up, and she slid into the passenger seat, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Michael looked at her, eyes scanning her face. What happened? Emily stared at the dashboard, her throat tight. Paul. Michael went still. What did he do? Emily shook her head. Nothing, just words. Michael's hands tightened around the steering wheel. Words can be dangerous. Emily swallowed hard. I didn't know who else to call. Michael's expression softened. I'm glad you called me. She turned to look at him. Why? Michael's jaw tensed. Because no one gets to threaten you. Not now. Not ever. Emily studied him, trying to understand why he cared so much. And for the first time, she let herself wonder. Maybe, just maybe, he really meant it. Maybe she wasn't alone anymore. The car ride was quiet. Emily sat with her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the city lights flickering through the window. She wasn't sure why she had called Michael. She wasn't even sure why she had gotten into the car with him. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Paul's words had slithered under her skin like poison, making her feel small again. Or maybe, deep down, she just wanted to believe that someone was actually on her side. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set in a hard line. She had never seen him like this before. Tense, quiet, furious. He didn't ask her any more questions. He didn't push. But the air inside the car felt charged, like he was barely holding himself together when he finally spoke. His voice was dangerously calm. Did he touch you? Emily blinked, turning to him. What? Paul, Michael said, his knuckles white against the wheel. Did he put his hands on you? Emily shook her head quickly. No, he just talked. Michael let out a slow breath. but it did nothing to ease the tension in his shoulders. "He's a coward," she muttered. "Men like him always are." Michael's grip tightened. "That doesn't mean he won't try something next time." Emily frowned. "You think there's going to be a next time?" Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he changed lanes, his expression unreadable. "I don't take risks when it comes to people I care about." Emily's breath hitched slightly. People he cared about. She looked down at her hands, not sure what to do with that. Michael finally pulled up in front of her apartment building and put the car in park. "I want you to stay somewhere else tonight," he said, his voice firm. Emily's head snapped up. "What?" "I don't trust that bastard not to follow you home," Emily scoffed, forcing a laugh. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" Michael didn't hesitate. "With me?" Emily blinked, stunned. "You're joking." He met her gaze. "Do I look like I'm joking?" She swallowed hard. "Michael, I have a guest room," he interrupted. "It's safe. You don't have to stay long. Just until I figure out how to handle this." Emily let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over her face. "I can handle myself." Michael's expression softened, but his voice remained steady. "I know you can, but you don't have to do everything alone." Emily hated how much those words affected her. She had spent her entire life relying on herself, learning not to trust anyone else. But now, Michael was offering something she had never had before. Not control, not power, just safety. And the worst part, she wanted to accept it. After a long moment, she sighed. "Fine, one night." Michael nodded, shifting the car back into gear. One night, the drive to his penthouse was quiet again. But it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, Emily felt something loosening inside her. Like the walls she had spent years building were starting to crack. She wasn't sure if that terrified her or not. When they arrived, she stepped into the massive apartment, eyes widening slightly. The place was exactly what she had expected. Sleek, modern, expensive, the kind of home that belonged to someone with more money than they knew what to do with. Emily folded her arms. "I think your living room is bigger than my entire apartment." Michael smirked, setting his keys down. "You should see the kitchen." She rolled her eyes but couldn't fight the small smile tugging at her lips. Michael led her to the guest room, opening the door. The space was just as extravagant as the rest of the apartment. Large bed, soft lighting, a view of the city that most people could only dream of. Emily hesitated in the doorway. This felt too much, too generous, too unfamiliar. Michael seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said quietly. "But the door is open." Emily swallowed, looking up at him. There was no pressure in his words, no expectation, just choice. And for the first time in her life, someone was giving her the space to make it. She stepped inside. Michael nodded. "If you need anything, my room is down the hall." Emily nodded back. "Thanks." Michael lingered for a second longer, then walked away, leaving her alone. She exhaled, closing the door behind her. This was new. This was strange. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Emily lay on the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like she didn't belong. Everything in this room, from the pristine white sheets to the soft glow of the bedside lamp, felt untouched, like a showroom, a place meant to be admired, not lived in. She curled up under the blanket, willing herself to sleep, but her mind refused to quiet. The mattress was too soft, the pillows too perfect. It felt like lying on a cloud, something most people would have killed for. But to her it was unsettling. She was used to tiny, lumpy beds, the kind that sagged in the middle, with blankets that smelled like cheap detergent. She had spent too many nights falling asleep to the distant sound of shouting neighbors, to the hum of a city that never rested. Here, in Michael Carter's penthouse, the silence was deafening. She sighed, sitting up and running a hand through her hair. This was a mistake. She should have gone home. But the moment Paul Green had smirked at her, had spoken those words dripping with veiled threats, something inside her had cracked. And for the first time in her life, she hadn't tried to handle it alone. She had called Michael, and that scared her more than anything. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, standing and rubbing at her tired eyes. Maybe some tea would help. Or maybe she just needed to remind herself that she could still leave. that she wasn't trapped here in this massive, suffocatingly perfect home. She opened the bedroom door quietly, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The apartment was still, bathed in the soft glow of city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She padded toward the kitchen, her bare feet silent against the cool hardwood floor. The space was sleek and modern, with gleaming marble counters and stainless steel appliances that probably cost more than her entire apartment. She had just reached for a cabinet when she heard movement behind her. She spun around, her pulse spiking. Michael stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't wearing his usual suit. Instead, he was in a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, looking more human than she had ever seen him. His hair was slightly tousled, like he had run his fingers through it too many times, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You can't sleep," he said. It wasn't a question. Emily exhaled, leaning against the counter. "How did you know?" Michael stepped forward, resting a hand on the back of one of the kitchen chairs. "Because I can't either." She frowned slightly. "Because of Paul." Michael's jaw tightened. "Because of a lot of things." Emily studied him. He looked exhausted, but there was something else beneath it. Frustration, maybe even guilt. "Do you regret this?" she asked. Michael's brows furrowed. "Regret what?" "Finding me." Michael's face softened. He shook his head. "Not for a second." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't understand him. He had spent decades without her. He had built an empire, surrounded himself with wealth and power. He didn't need her. And yet, here he was, losing sleep over the fact that someone had threatened her. She looked down at her hands, gripping the edge of the counter. "I'm not used to people caring." Michael exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "I hate knowing that you grew up thinking you had no one." Emily swallowed hard. Michael leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "I know I can't change the past, but I am here now." She didn't know how to respond to that. She wanted to believe him, but people always left. Michael pushed away from the counter and opened one of the cabinets, pulling out 2 mugs. "Tea?" he asked. Emily raised an eyebrow. "You drink tea." Michael smirked. "Only when I can't sleep." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine." He filled the kettle, setting it on the stove. The kitchen was silent except for the quiet bubbling of the water as it heated. Emily leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I always imagined you as one of those coffee-addicted corporate guys." Michael chuckled. "I am, but tea reminds me of your mother." Emily's breath caught slightly. Michael didn't look at her as he spoke, but his voice had softened. "She used to make me drink it when I was too stressed. Said it would help." Emily stared at him. It was so easy to forget that he had known Claire, that once, a long time ago, he had been in love with her. She swallowed. "What was she like when you knew her?" Michael looked down at the tea bag in his hand, turning it over slowly. "She was stubborn, but she had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you." Emily let out a quiet laugh. "That sounds about right." Michael met her gaze. "You look like her." Emily stiffened slightly. Michael continued, his voice quieter now. "But you have my eyes." She looked away. "People say that. I don't really see it." Michael studied her for a long moment, then placed a mug in front of her. "Drink," he said. Emily huffed. "Are you always this bossy?" Michael smirked. "Occupational hazard." She rolled her eyes but took a sip. The warmth seeped into her, soothing something deep inside her chest. They stood there for a long time, drinking in silence. Finally, Michael set his cup down. "I want you to stay as long as you need." Emily tensed. "Michael, I know you don't want to rely on anyone," he interrupted, "and I won't force you, but I need you to know that my door is always open." Emily exhaled slowly. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for him, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to walk away. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to stay, just a little longer. Emily woke up to the unfamiliar feeling of warmth and stillness. No blaring sirens outside her window. No neighbors arguing in the apartment next door. No rattling pipes that threatened to burst in the middle of the night. She sat up slowly. Momentarily disoriented, the guest room was bathed in soft morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the sleek furniture. The bed was still too soft, the sheets too smooth. She wasn't used to comfort stretching. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet touching the cool hardwood floor. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the closed door. For years, she had never woken up in a place that felt safe. There was always an underlying sense of unease, a tension that never fully left her body. But here, in Michael's penthouse, there was none of that. It terrified her. She didn't want to get used to this. Pushing the thought aside, she stepped out of the room, cautiously making her way toward the kitchen. She found Michael already there, dressed in dark slacks and a fitted sweater, standing by the stove with a coffee cup in one hand and a spatula in the other. The sight was so utterly domestic that she nearly laughed. Michael Carter, millionaire businessman, owner of a restaurant empire, was making pancakes. He looked up as she entered, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Morning." Emily crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "I didn't take you for the kind of guy who cooks." Michael flipped a pancake effortlessly. "I don't, but I figured since you stayed the night, the least I could do was offer breakfast." Emily raised an eyebrow. "So this is a bribe?" Michael shrugged. "Call it whatever you want." She exhaled, rubbing a hand over her face. "You don't have to do this." Michael's expression softened. "I know. But I want to." Emily swallowed. She wasn't used to people doing things for her just because they wanted to. She sat at the counter, watching as he finished cooking. When he slid a plate in front of her, she hesitated before picking up the fork. The first bite melted in her mouth. "Damn," she muttered. I was expecting these to be terrible." Michael chuckled, taking a seat across from her. "I'm offended," she smirked. "You'll survive." They ate in silence for a while, the tension between them lighter than it had been the night before. But then Michael spoke, his voice careful. "I meant what I said last night." "Emily?" She stiffened slightly. "Which part?" Michael set his fork down, leaning forward. "You don't have to do everything alone." Emily swallowed. "I've been doing it alone for a long time." Michael nodded slowly. "I know, but you don't have to anymore." She looked down at her plate, her appetite fading. "I don't know how to do this, Michael." "Do what?" She gestured vaguely. "This. Letting someone in, trusting that it won't just fall apart." Michael's voice was steady. "It won't." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "You say that now." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "You think I'll leave?" Emily didn't respond. Michael exhaled. "I'm not going anywhere." She shook her head. "You say that, but people always go. They change their minds. They realize I'm not worth the effort." Michael's jaw tightened. "Who made you believe that?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the intensity in his voice. She let out a slow breath. "Everyone!" Michael clenched his fists. "Then they were all wrong." Emily looked away. "You don't know that." Michael stood, walking around the counter until he was standing in front of her. He crouched slightly, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I do," he said, his voice low but firm. "And I'll prove it to you. As many times as it takes." Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but believing meant risking, and she wasn't sure if she could survive another loss. Michael straightened, giving her space. "I won't push you, Emily, but I need you to know that I want to be here, and I will be, whether you believe it or not." She studied him, searching for any sign of hesitation, any hint of doubt, but there was none. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. "You're exhausting." Michael smirked. "You're not the first person to say that." Emily sighed. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this." Michael shrugged. "You don't have to do anything right now. Just let me be here." She hesitated. Then slowly, she nodded. Michael smiled, and for the first time, it didn't feel forced. Emily sat on the couch, legs curled beneath her, staring out at the vast city skyline stretching beyond the penthouse windows. The morning sunlight streamed through the glass, casting long, golden shadows across the pristine floor. It was beautiful, peaceful. She wasn't used to peace. Michael sat in the chair across from her, flipping through his phone, fully dressed for the day in a crisp white button-down, his tie draped loosely around his neck. He looked like a man ready to conquer another business empire. But something about him felt different. He wasn't rushing out the door. He wasn't preoccupied with emails or meetings. He was here, and for some reason, that unsettled her more than anything. She shifted slightly, clearing her throat. "Don't you have some big CEO thing to do today?" Michael glanced up, smirking. "Probably, but nothing that can't wait." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You, putting work on hold. That's new." Michael leaned back in his chair, his smirk softening. "Some things are more important." Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to roll her eyes. "Don't get sentimental on me," Michael chuckled. "Wouldn't dream of it." She picked at the hem of her sweater, her fingers restless. She didn't know what to do with this. The quiet, the stability, the fact that for the first time in years she wasn't waking up alone. It had only been one night, just a few hours in a place that wasn't hers. But she had slept better than she had in a long time, and that terrified her. She wasn't supposed to get comfortable. She wasn't supposed to let herself want this. Michael must have sensed her unease because he set his phone down, watching her carefully. "Talk to me." Emily stiffened. "About what?" Michael's voice was steady. "About whatever's on your mind." Emily exhaled sharply. "You really want to open that door?" Michael nodded. "I do." She hesitated, looking away. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this wasn't temporary, that he wasn't just saying things to make her feel better. But she had been let down before. She had spent years being someone's temporary responsibility, someone's problem to solve. And yet, Michael wasn't treating her like a problem. He was treating her like a person, like family. She swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do this, Michael." His gaze remained steady. "Neither do I." She let out a shaky breath. "What if I mess it up?" Michael smiled slightly. "Then we figure it out, together." Her chest ached. She had spent so much of her life expecting people to leave. Now, for the first time, someone was promising to stay. Michael's voice was softer now. "You don't have to decide anything right now, Emily. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to know that I'm here." She looked down, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sweater. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him that she was scared, that she didn't know how to trust this, that a part of her was still waiting for the moment he changed his mind. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she swallowed them down and changed the subject. "So," she said, forcing her voice to sound casual, "if I'm staying here, even just for a little while, you should know something about me." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Emily smirked slightly. "I have complete control over the TV remote." Michael let out a low chuckle. "That's so?" She nodded. "It's a rule." Michael leaned back, amused. "All right, hit me with your worst." Emily grabbed the remote, flipping through channels until she landed on the cheesiest, most over-the-top reality show she could find. Michael took one look at the screen and groaned. "Seriously?" Emily grinned. "You agreed." He shook his head, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I take back everything I said about wanting to bond." Emily laughed. A real laugh, not the guarded, half-hearted ones she usually gave. It surprised even her. Michael glanced at her, something soft in his expression. "You should laugh more," he said. Emily's smile faded slightly. "Not a lot of reasons to." Michael's jaw tightened. "Then we'll find some." She stared at him, her heart pounding. For the first time, she believed him. For the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. She leaned back against the couch, crossing her arms. "Fine, but you're not allowed to complain when I pick another episode." Michael sighed, shaking his head. "You're going to make me suffer, aren't you?" Emily smirked. "Absolutely." Michael chuckled, reaching for his coffee. And as they sat there, watching a show neither of them really cared about, Emily realized something. She didn't have to know what this was right now. She didn't have to have all the answers. All she had to do was take it one day at a time. And for the first time, that was enough.